The first thing I noticed was the smell. Bleach, sharp and almost metallic, curling through the dim air of the store like a warning. I'd been on the graveyard shift for years, enough nights to know the hum of the refrigerators, the soft flicker of the overhead fluorescents, the muted tick of the clock on the far wall. But that smell wasn't ordinary. I rounded the corner where we kept the cleaning supplies and froze. The bottles were no longer haphazard, no longer leaning against each other or scattered as they had been at the start of the night. They were arranged in a perfect circle, each container equidistant. Facing inward, labels turned toward the center as if bowing to something I couldn't see. At first, I thought someone had broken in, a prank left by some bored night wanderer. But the door at the back was locked, the cameras hadn't picked up any movement besides me, and the street outside lay empty beneath the weak yellow wash of the street lamp. I stepped closer, the linoleum cold beneath my shoes, and the smell of bleach sharpened, filling my nostrils like a pulse. I reached toward a bottle, an ordinary spray of ammonia, and my fingers hovered above it. The circle felt alive. The bottles weren't just sitting there. They seemed to hold a subtle tension, vibrating in place as though waiting. I heard a soft clatter, a tiny rolling of plastic against plastic, and instinctively stepped back. The circle wasn't huge, maybe 3 feet across, but its symmetry was impossible. Every bottle exactly the same distance from its neighbors, the tops aligned in a perfect horizontal plane. It drew the eye toward the center, an empty space that seemed to thrum with something just beyond perception. I swallowed and tried to rationalize it. I'd read about people who spoke of lived architecture, buildings that seemed to shift around those inside them, a slight warp in perception, floors tilting where none should, shadows falling oddly. I never believed it, not until now. The store had always been ordinary, fluorescent tubes and canned soup, but now the aisles seemed narrower, the lights dimmer, the hum of the refrigerators uneven. It was as though the building itself had leaned closer, observing. A reflection caught my eye in the polished surface of the floor. At first, it was just my own, pale and twitching as I shifted. Then I noticed something. My reflection lingered a fraction behind me, delayed, staring at the circle with a gaze that wasn't entirely mine. I blinked, and it matched me again. But the sense of delay remained, subtle, uncanny. I backed up another step. My shoes made a hollow sound against the vinyl tiles, echoing faintly, longer than normal. The circle seemed to pulse in response. A bottle rocked slightly on its own, then another, then a third, each moving with precision, snapping back into perfect alignment. There was a rhythm here, like a heartbeat, soft but insistent. I tried to tell myself it was the draft from the air vent, the uneven floor, fatigue. I'd been alone for 6 hours, after all. But the air smelled stronger now, the chemical bite of bleach mixed with something earthy, almost metallic. And then I noticed the labels. Every word faced inward. The brands, the instructions, the tiny hazard symbols, all directed at the empty center. I crouched to look closer, drawn as though by gravity, and for a moment, I thought I saw something inside the circle. A shadow, impossible and wrong, folding over itself, not quite solid. I jerked my head up, my pulse quickening, and the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times, casting stripes across the floor that bent around the circle as though the tiles themselves were alive. I told myself to leave it, that I'd call the manager, that I'd step outside, that whatever this was, it wasn't not real. But the store had changed. The aisles stretched longer than they should. The refrigerator's hum rose and fell with a pattern, deliberate, almost conversational. I felt the circle watching, or perhaps waiting. A soft sound reached me, like plastic tapping against plastic, but rhythmic, organized. The bottles shifted again, tiny rotations, a slow dance. I realized with a jolt that the circle was rotating, not in the center, but around its own axis, imperceptibly, perfectly. I took a step back. The circle wasn't just a circle anymore, it was a boundary. Something held within it, something that had been waiting for me to notice. I glanced at the security cameras, their red lights blinking steadily, but the feed was gone. The screens went black, then flickered with the ceiling tile's reflection. each tile twisting slightly, as if the store itself had decided it could no longer tolerate my presence. I reached for my phone, but the screen displayed nothing but a reflection of the circle. My own hand appeared to stretch toward it, but lagged slightly behind my movements, the delay growing with every second. The circle pulsed, subtly, like breathing, and I noticed a faint warmth emanating from it, a heat that should not have been there. I swallowed, heart hammering. The bottle's subtle vibrations quickened, resonating through the floor into my feet. The labels, always facing inward, now seemed to shimmer. Tiny words I hadn't noticed before, words not in English, not any language I knew, wove across the labels like a script scrawled for an audience beyond me. I stumbled backward, toward the front of the store. The fluorescent above me buzzed, flickered, then stabilized. The humming of the refrigerators flattened, steady, but colder somehow. My reflection no longer lagged. It stared directly at me with an expression I did not recognize. The circle had not moved, yet I felt the distance between us shrink. I thought to call someone again, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no signal, just the persistent smell and the soft, deliberate clattering from the back aisle. I realized then that the circle was not a prank, not a message, it was an invitation or a warning, and I had no choice but to acknowledge it. The lights flickered again. This time, one bulb went out completely, leaving a patch of shadow that stretched from the circle like a finger. I took a step forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The empty center of the circle seemed to throb, drawing me closer, and I noticed the floor beneath it shimmered, as if a thin layer of water reflected something beneath the linoleum. I leaned closer, breath fogging the air, and the words on the labels coalesced into a single phrase, vibrating faintly in my skull rather than my ears. Stay outside. Don't step in. I froze, every muscle taut. The circle pulsed again, once, twice, then a third time, harder than before. The bottles rocked violently, then fell perfectly back into place, as if nothing had happened. My reflection smiled. Not me, not exactly me, but some version of me that had already obeyed. I took a step back. The store returned to its normal hum. The lights flickered back into steady illumination, and the chemical smell dulled to the background. The circle remained perfect, silent, waiting. I left the aisle, pretending I had just noticed a spill. I straightened the shelves elsewhere, faked cleaning, kept my eyes forward. I left the store at dawn. The circle was still there, and I knew, somewhere deep in the tremor of my bones, that it had not been waiting for me to see it. It had been waiting for me to leave, because what entered the circle would not come out, and I would never know what would step in if I ever stayed too long. The night had settled into its usual rhythm, the low hum of the refrigerators, the distant drip of the ice machine, and the flicker of the overhead fluorescence that never seemed to match. Time had always felt slightly off on the shift, but I'd grown used to it, or thought I had. I was alone, stacking cans of soup and wiping down shelves, when the door chimed. A man stepped in, and the bell's sound stretched longer than it should have, a hollow echo that didn't quite stop. He was average in height, thin, dressed in a worn overcoat that smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood. His eyes were dark but sharp, scanning the store with a patience that unsettled me. "Do you still sell time?" he asked, his voice soft but precise, like he had rehearsed the words in a whispering mirror. I blinked. The sentence hung between us, suspended, and I swear the clock above the back aisle skipped a second before ticking again. Time, I thought, isn't something you buy. "I'm sorry," I said, but the words felt clumsy in the stillness. "Time," he repeated. "I came here once before. You sold it." I shook my head slowly. "I think you're mistaken. We sell the usual food, drinks, cleaning supplies." I kept my hands on the counter, not trusting myself to approach him. He smiled faintly, not unpleasantly, but the sort of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The aisle near the back," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Next to the energy drinks. That's where it was." Something in the air shifted. I glanced at the back corner. The fluorescence above the aisle flickered 3 times in a deliberate rhythm, shadows stretching unnaturally along the floor. The hum of the refrigerators seemed to stretch and compress at the same time. I stepped forward, pointing vaguely. That aisle? Nothing unusual there. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, and I felt the store's geometry bend subtly around him. The shelves behind me seemed to stretch a little longer than before. The canned goods in the adjacent aisle appeared twice, then once, as though the store couldn't settle on a single arrangement. "You're not looking," he said. His tone had the weight of conviction. "It's not gone. It's just misplaced." I frowned. The words felt wrong in my mouth. Misplaced? I felt the floor shift under my weight, ever so slightly. A reflection caught my eye in the glass door of the freezer. My own face, but delayed, trailing a half-second behind my movements. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced with the ordinary. "Time is tricky," he continued, wandering down the aisle as if he knew it would bend around him. "You can buy it, borrow it, lose it. But this place, this store, stores it differently." I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. There was an unnatural stillness in the store, a sense that the air itself had slowed to match his presence. I followed him with my eyes as he paused at the end of the aisle. He knelt briefly, tracing a finger along the tile floor. I blinked, and the aisle seemed to stretch beyond its normal length. The light at the far end dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again in a rhythm that made my pulse syncopate with the flickering bulbs. "You don't understand," he said softly. "It's not something you hold. It's something the store trades in, collects, sometimes forgets." "Stores? Collects time?" I asked. My voice sounded wrong, stretched, as if a second or two had already passed before I spoke. The man smiled, watching me struggle with the temporal lag. "Yes," he said. "You see, the clock's here." He pointed toward the back, where the wall clock ticked in deliberate mismatch with the cashier's digital timer. They don't measure time. They mark it. Moments collected, suspended, waiting for someone to take them, trade them, or leave them behind. I felt my stomach tighten. Something was very wrong. The fluorescence flickered in a deliberate cadence. The tiles beneath my shoes rippled faintly, like liquid that had frozen mid-motion. I realized then that I could hear my own heartbeat twice, first normally, then a fraction of a second later, echoing in a phantom rhythm that did not belong to me. "What happens if it runs out?" I asked, voice trembling despite my attempt at calm. The man smiled again, faint, distant. "You'll know. The store always collects a price." He rose to his feet, walking backward, slowly, almost as if the aisles themselves were guiding him. "Some people pay with hours, some with memories, and some, well, they stay here waiting." I swallowed hard. My reflection in the freezer door was no longer delayed. It had a sharp edge now, staring at me with hollowed eyes I did not recognize. The man's voice echoed faintly from that reflection, though he had moved to the far aisle. "Do you want to buy some time?" he asked. I don't even know what that means," I said. The word sounded strange, even to me. Somewhere behind me, the clock ticked 13 times in 10 seconds. He shook his head slowly, an almost imperceptible motion. "You always know. Eventually." His eyes gleamed in the dim light. "But it's never free." The air around him shimmered, the shelves behind him folding into themselves like paper, repeating, doubling, collapsing. I stepped back, tripping over a can, and it rolled across the floor and stopped perfectly at the foot of a shelf that had no logical reason to be there. The store itself seemed aware of me, aware of the moment I had intruded upon. I backed toward the front, trying to regain normality, trying to convince myself this was a dream. But the fluorescent buzz and the hum of the refrigerators carried a message. The store remembered. It had stored time, and it had noted my presence. Every tick of every mismatched clock, every step I took on the shifting tiles, every reflection that lagged just a fraction of a second. None of it was accidental. I'm leaving," I said. The man tilted his head, expression patient, almost compassionate. "You can't leave," he murmured. Not yet. Not until you understand. And then I noticed it. The timestamp on the receipt printer, glowing faintly on the counter, moving backward before my eyes. The numbers rolled in reverse, second by second, a pale green light that reflected off the tile floor and stretched toward me like a tongue of shadow. I wanted to run, but my body felt heavy, as if the very moment I was in had been anchored to the floor. The man's voice came again, from nowhere and everywhere. Time here, it's borrowed. Some pay, some don't. But no one leaves unchanged. I finally found the strength to push the door open. The bell chimed again, but it was hollow, stretched, fading into a silence that refused to resolve. Outside, the streetlight flickered in the same irregular rhythm as the fluorescence inside. I glanced back once. The aisle seemed to stretch endlessly, bottles and cans repeating, a corridor suspended between moments. And the man, he was gone. But I could feel him. The sense of him lingered in the air, in the lagging reflections, in the mismatched ticks. The store had collected something from me tonight, something I could not name, and I knew that even now, some small piece of my time was suspended, held hostage in that quiet, humming place. I drove home slowly, glancing at my watch, which ticked unevenly, sometimes forward, sometimes back. I felt hours vanish between the ticks. Minutes disappeared like smoke. I remembered the man's eyes, patient and knowing, and I realized, in a sudden, icy clarity, that the store would always have my time, and one day I would return, compelled, unable to resist, to pay whatever it demanded, or to be trapped in its aisles, suspended, counting moments that were no longer mine. Time had been sold. I had bought some without knowing it. And the rest, I feared, would always belong to the store.